My name is Reagan, and I'm going to be reading from Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Moby-Dick. Chapter 1. New Means. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to command.
Hi everyone, it's Miss Mac. I'm going to start by catching us up on part 2 of Frankenstein. So we read the letters in class and we started chapters 1 and 2. So I'm going to pick up today with chapter 3. So this video is just going to be for the read aloud portion. I'll post another video later that goes through the annotations. Okay, so you'll see a video of me going through how to mark.
Hey,
but this
happy Thursday.
It's going to be the read aloud
again. Sorry guys, I don't know what's going on with my computer right now. It just crashed and kicked me out. So just as I was about to start, so we didn't get through any reading, but we did get through a lot of exposition. Quarantine story hour, which me with Charlotte and her crummy computer reading War and Peace, which is a thick book, just getting started. Thank you to those who've been watching. Sorry for the tech trouble. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'll see what I can do about preventing it. This is the second time it's happened in the last couple weeks, so I don't know if it's something from my computer's end or YouTube. But anyways, if you're back, welcome back. I was just saying that we're through a little bit of the book. Not very much, but enough to know that there's a lot of intrigue going on, people who are angling for a dying count's fortune, and his son, Pierre, is there. And what else? Sorry. Got distracted. So his son Pierre is there. Pierre is an illegitimate son, so some people think that he might inherit if the sovereign will recognize him as like a legitimate adopted son, because the count has a lot of money. A lot of people are angling to be part of his will and not wanting to Pierre to inherit it all. Pierre seems like a nice guy, but he's a bit of a flighty sort of dude. Just does whatever. Not really good about making a plan and sticking to it, not really good about, having any kind of like real moral guidelines. He kind of just parties. He brought some shame on the family by tying a policeman to a bear and throwing them both in the river. So someone he's been staying with is Prince Vasily while he's back in Russia from studying abroad, and Prince Vasily is like distantly related to him through his wife, Prince Vasily's wife, and that's why Prince Vasily is also angling for this fortune. And it seems like he and some other members of the family may have sought out the will and some documents that would have helped Pierre inherit, and they might be trying to hide those, destroy them, whatever. And the count has had several strokes, and he's getting last rites, and everyone is sitting around his bedside. And Pierre is feeling really maybe sad for the first time, realizing his dad might be dying. So that's a little bit of recap. For more information about what happened last time, you can always go to my channel and look at the War and Peace playlist for all of the readings so far. and I'll also drop a link directly to that playlist in the end of this video once this video is properly finished. Again, I'm sorry about that. It's just really kind of weird and frustrating. But anyways, so shaking that off, let's just carry right back in where we were. If you were here for the first time I started this, you got a little bit of a better explanation than this, but it is what it is. Hopefully you tuned in before so you have an idea. Otherwise, it's alright. You know, you get a feel. Prince Vasily, who's here. There's these princesses who are related to the Count who've been staying with him, who also are hoping to inherit, and the Count was the lover of Catherine the Great, so there's a lot of paintings of her around just in case that comes up. Also, like I was saying before, there's a lot of French in this book, and so if there's a few words or sentences, I might read them, but this translation that I have has footnotes with a lot of the French in English at the bottom of the page. So as I was looking ahead for today, there are whole pages written in French, like someone wrote a letter in French or whatever, and it's all written out in French. I do not speak French well enough that I'm going to read full paragraphs, full pages of French. It would be embarrassing to myself and to French speakers all over the world. Also, if you don't understand French, we're gonna all be lost here for a minute. So when it comes to that, I'll probably start jumping down to those larger sections. I'll jump down to the English at the bottom, just so that we can all kind of really know what's going on, and I don't have to embarrass myself or offend anyone. So there's that. So we're on section 21 today, and I'm just going to check one thing before we get going. Alright. Let's see. And I have the live chat going, so feel free to drop a comment or question. Like if as the reading's going, something doesn't make sense, feel free to drop a comment. And if maybe it's a character or a situation that we've encountered before and this is your first time, or if you don't remember, if I could reference it or remember it for you, I'll try to jump in and help as well. So I'll try to keep an eye on that. Otherwise, let's just dig into some Tolstoy. Pierre has just left the room of his dying father, who appears to have fallen asleep. Section 21. There was no one in the reception room now except Prince Vasily and the elder princess, who were sitting under the portrait of Catherine, having a lively talk. As soon as they saw Pierre with his guide, they fell silent. The princess hid something, as it seemed to Pierre, and whispered, "I can't bear that woman." "Katisha fait donner de dans le petit salon," Prince Vasily said to Anna Mikhailovna. "Allez, mon pauvre Anna Mikhailovna, prenez quelque chose, autrement vous ne souffrirez pas." He said nothing to Pierre, only squeezed his upper arm feelingly. Pierre and Anna Mikhailovna moved on to the small drawing room. "Il n'y a rien que restevoir, comme une tasse de cette excellente Verrousse après une nuit blanche," said Lorraine with an expression of restrained animation, sipping from a fine china cup without a handle, standing in the small, round drawing room in front of a table on which a tea service and a cold supper had been laid. Everyone who was in Count Vizukov's house that night gathered around the table to fortify themselves. Pierre remembered very well this small, round drawing room with its mirrors and little tables. During balls at the Count's house, Pierre, who danced poorly, liked to sit in this little room of mirrors and watch how ladies in ball gowns, with diamonds and pearls on their bare shoulders, passed through this room, looking at themselves in the brightly lit mirrors, which repeated their reflections several times. Now the same room was barely lit with 2 candles, and in the middle of the night a tea service and some dishes lay in disorder on one of the little tables, and various non-festive people exchanging whispers were sitting in it, showing with each movement, each word, that none of them had forgotten what was going on and was yet to be consummated in the bedroom. Pierre did not eat, though he very much wanted to. He glanced questioningly at his guide and saw her going out on tiptoe, back to the reception room where Prince Vasily had remained with the elder princess. Pierre supposed that it had to be so, lingered a little, and followed her. Anna Mikhailovna was standing by the princess, and the two women were speaking simultaneously in agitated whispers. "Allow me, princess, to know what is and what is not necessary," the younger woman was saying, evidently in the same agitated state she had been in when she had slammed the door to her room. "But my dear princess," Anna Mikhalovna was saying meekly and persuasively, barring the way to the bedroom and preventing the princess from going in. "Won't it be too hard on poor dear uncle at such a moment, when he needs rest? Talk about worldly things at such a moment, when his soul is literally prepared." Prince Vasily was sitting in an armchair, in a casual pose, one leg crossed high up over the other. His cheeks were twitching badly, and, when they slackened, seemed fatter below, but he had the look of a man who was little taken up with the conversation of the two ladies. "Voyons, mon bon Anna Mikhalovna, laissez-faire Katiche. You know how the Count loves her." "I don't even know what's in this document," said the princess, turning to Prince Vasily and pointing to the inlaid portfolio she was holding in her hands. "I only know that the real will is in his desk, and this is a forgotten document." She tried to go around Anna Mikhalovna, but Anna Mikhalovna sprang over and again barred her way. "I know, dear good princess," said Anna Mikhalovna, seizing the portfolio with her hand, and so firmly that it was clear that she would not soon let go of it. "Dear princess, I beg you, I beseech you, have pity on him. Je vous en conjure." The princess said nothing. All that could be heard was the sound of the efforts of the struggle over the portfolio. It was clear if she did start to talk, it would not be flattering for Anna Mikhalovna. Anna Mikhalovna held on tight, but in spite of that, her voice retained its sweet, drawling softness. "Pierre, come here, my friend. I think you won't be out of place in the family council. Isn't that so, Pierre?" "Why are you silent, mon cousin?" the princess suddenly shouted so loudly that the people in the drawing room heard and were frightened by her voice. "Why are you silent when here God knows who allows herself to interfere and make scenes on dying man's threshold? Intriguer!" she whispered spitefully and tugged at the portfolio with all her might. But Anna Mikhalovna went a few steps so as not to let go of the portfolio and shifted her grip. "Oh," Prince Vasily said with a reproach and astonishment. He got up. "C'est ridicule. Voyons, let's go, I tell you." The princess let go. "You too!" Anna Mikhalovna did not obey him. "Let go, I tell you. I take it all upon myself. I'll go and ask him. Let that be enough for you." "Mais, mon prince," said Anna Mikhalovna, "give him a moment's rest after such a great sacrament. Here, Pierre, tell us your opinion." She turned to the young man, who, coming up close to them, looked with astonishment at the princess's spiteful face, which had lost all decency, and at the twitching cheeks of Prince Vasily. "Remember that you will answer for all the consequences," Prince Vasily said sternly, "and you don't know what you're doing." "Loathsome woman," the princess cried, suddenly falling on Anna Mikhalovna and tearing the portfolio from her. Prince Vasily hung his head and spread his hands. At that moment the door, that awful door at which Pierre had stared for so long and which had opened so softly, now it opened noisily, banging against the wall, and the young princess ran out clasping her hands. "What are you doing?" she said desperately. "Il s'en va et vous me laissez seule." The elder princess dropped the portfolio. Anna Mikhalovna quickly bent down and picked up the disputed object, ran to the bedroom. The elder princess and Prince Vasily came to their senses and followed her. A few minutes later, the elder princess was the first to come out, with a pale and dry face, biting her lower lip. At the sight of Pierre, her face showed irrepressible spite. "Yes, rejoice now," she said. "You've been waiting for this." And, bursting into sobs, she covered her face with a handkerchief and ran out of the room. After the princess, Prince Vasily came out. Staggering, he reached the sofa on which Pierre was sitting and collapsed on it, covering his eyes with his hands. Pierre noted that he was pale, and his lower jaw was twitching and shaking in a fever. "Ah, my friend," he said, taking Pierre by the elbow, and in his voice there was sincerity and weakness, such as Pierre had never noticed in him before. "We sin so much, we deceive so much, and all for what? I'm over 50, my friend. Everything ends in death, everything. Death is terrible," he wept. Anna Mikhalovna was the last to come out. She went to Pierre with quiet, slow steps. "Pierre," she said. Pierre looked at her questioningly. She kissed the young man on the forehead, wetting it with her tears. She paused. "Il n'est plus." Pierre looked at her through his spectacles. "Allons, je vous reconduirai. Tâchez de pleurer. Rien ne les solange comme les âmes." She led him to the dark drawing room, and Pierre was glad that nobody could see his face. Anna Mikhailovna left him, and when she came back, he was sound asleep, his head resting on his arm. The next morning, Anna Mikhailovna said to Pierre, "Oui, mon cher, c'est une grande perte pour nous tous. Je ne parlais pas de vous, mais du vous s'entendra, vous êtes jeune et vous voilà à la tête d'une immense fortune, je l'espère. Le testament n'est pas encore ouvert. Je vous connais assez pour savoir que cela ne vous tournera pas la tête, mais cela vous impose de voir et il fait être homme." Pierre was silent. Peut-être plus tard, je vous dirai, mon cher. I think I'm going to jump down to the English at this point for all our six. So I'll just jump back up to what she said. The next morning, Anna Mikhailovna said to Pierre, in English, "Yes, my dear, it is a great loss for us all, to say nothing of you, but God will sustain you. You are young, and you are at the head of an immense fortune, I hope. The will has not yet been opened. I know you well enough to know that this will not turn your head, but it does impose duties on you, and one must be a man." Pierre was silent. "Perhaps later on I'll tell you, my dear, that if I hadn't been there, God knows what would have happened. You know my uncle just the day before yesterday promised me not to forget Boris, but he had no time. I hope, my dear friend, that you will fulfill your father's wish." Pierre understood nothing and silently gazed at Anna Mikhailovna, blushing shyly. Having talked with Pierre, Anna Mikhailovna drove off to the Rostovs and went to bed. She woke up in the morning and told the Rostovs and all her acquaintances the detail of Count Vizukov's death. She said that the Count had died as she would like to die, that his end had been not only touching but also instructive, and the last meeting of the father and son had been so touching that she could not recall it without tears, and that she did not know who had behaved better in those terrible moments. The father who remembered everything and everyone so well in the last minutes and said such touching things to the son, or Pierre, who was a pity to see, he was so crushed, but who nevertheless tried to hide his sorrow so as not to upset his father. It's, in English, "It's painful, but it does one good. It elevates the soul to see men like the old Count and his worthy son," she said. She also told disapprovingly about the actions of the princess and Prince Vasily, but as a great secret and in a whisper. Hey! Alright, so 22. So then it seems like there's lots of schemers in this book. At Bald Hills, the estate of Prince Nikolai Andreevich Volkonsky, the arrival of the young Prince Andrei and the princess was expected any day. But that expectation did not disrupt the harmonious order in which life went on in the old prince's house. General-in-Chief Prince Nikolai Andreevich, known in society as Le Roi de Prusse, the King of Prussia, had been banished to his country estate under Paul and had lived uninterruptedly at Bald Hills ever since, with his daughter, Princess Maria, and her companion, Mademoiselle Bourienne. And under the new reign, though he was permitted entry to the capitals, he went on living uninterruptedly in the country. Interesting. He went on living uninterruptedly in the country, saying that anyone who needed him could travel to the 100 miles from Moscow to Bald Hills, but that he himself needed no one and nothing. He used to say that there were only two sources of human vice, idleness and superstition, and that there were only two virtues, activity and intelligence. He occupied himself personally with his daughter's upbringing and developed the two chief virtues in her, gave her lessons in algebra and geometry, and portioned out her whole life among constant studies. He himself was constantly occupied, now with writing his memoirs, now with higher mathematical calculations, now with turning snuff boxes on a lathe, and now with working in the garden and supervising the construction work that never ceased on his estate. as the main condition for activity was order, so the order in his way of life was brought to the utmost degree of precision. His coming to the table was performed under the same invariable conditions, and not only at the same hour, but at the same minute. With the people around him, from his daughter to the servants, the prince was brusque and invariably demanding, and thus, without being cruel, inspired a fear and respect for himself, such as the cruelest of men would not find it easy to obtain. Though he was retired, and now with no importance in state affairs, every governor of the province in which the prince's estate lay considered it his duty to call on him, and like the architect, the gardener, or Princess Maria, to wait at the appointed hour for the prince to come out to the high-ceilinged waiting room. And each person in the waiting room experienced the same feeling of respect and even fear at the moment when the immensely high door to the study opened and revealed the small figure of the old man in a powdered wig with small dry hands and gray beetling brows, which sometimes, when he frowned, hid the brightness of his intelligence and youthfully bright eyes. On the day of the young couple's arrival in the morning, as usual, Princess Maria went into the waiting room at the appointed hour for the morning greeting, and fearfully crossed herself and inwardly recited a prayer. Every day she went in, and every day she prayed that this daily meeting would go well. A powdered old servant who was sitting in the waiting room got up with a quiet movement and in a whisper announced, "If you please." And from behind the door came the regular sounds of a lathe. The princess timidly pulled the easily and smoothly opening door and stepped into the doorway. The prince was working at the lathe, and having glanced at her, went on with what he was doing. The immense study was filled with things obviously in constant use. The big table with books and plans lying on it, the tall bookcases with keys in their glass doors, the tall table for writing in a standing position on which lay an open notebook, the lathe with tools laid out and wood shavings strewn around it. Everything spoke of constant, diverse, and orderly activity. By the movement of the small foot shod in a silver-embroidered Tartar boot, by the firm pressure of the sinewy, lean hand, one could see in the prince the still persistent and much enduring strength of fresh old age. Having made a few more turns, he took his foot from the pedal of the lathe, wiped the chisel, dropped it into a leather pouch attached to the lathe, and going to the table, called his daughter over. He never blessed his children, but offering her his bristly, as yet unshaven cheek, giving her a stern and at the same time attentively tender look, merely said, "Are you well? Sit down then." He took the geometry notebook, written in his own hand, and moved a chair over with his foot. "For tomorrow," he said, quickly finding the page and marking it paragraph by paragraph with his hard fingernail. The princess bent to the table over the notebook. "Wait, there's a letter for you," the old man said suddenly, taking an envelope with a woman's writing on it from a pouch attached to the table and dropping it in front of her. At the sight of the letter, the princess's face became covered with red blotches. She hastily took it and bent over it. "From Heloise?" asked the prince, baring his still strong and yellowish teeth in a cold smile. "Yes, from Julie," said the princess, glancing up timidly and smiling timidly. "I'll skip 2 letters and read the 3rd, the prince said sternly. "I'm afraid you write a lot of nonsense. I'll read the 3rd. "You can read this one, mon Pierre," the princess replied, blushing still more and handing him the letter. "The 3rd, I said, the 3rd, the prince shouted curtly, pushing the letter away, and leaning his elbow on the table, drew the notebook with geometry drawings towards him. "Well, ma'am," the old man began, bending close to his daughter over the notebook, and putting one arm on the back of the chair in which the princess was sitting, so that the princess felt herself surrounded on all sides by her father's strong smell of tobacco and pungent old age, which she had known so long. "Well, ma'am, these triangles are similar. Kindly look, the angle ABC. The princess glanced fearfully at her father's bright eyes, so near to her. Red blotches came over her face, and it was obvious that she understood nothing, and was so afraid that fear would prevent her from understanding all of her father's further explanation, however clear they were. Whether it was the teacher or the pupil who was at fault, the same thing repeated itself every day. The princess felt giddy, saw nothing, heard nothing, only felt the lean face of her stern father near her, felt his breathing and his smell, and thought only of how to get out of the study as quickly as possible and work out the problem in the freedom of her own room. The old man would get beside himself. He would noisily move the chair he was sitting in back and forth, trying hard to keep himself from flying into a rage, and almost always flew into a rage, poured out abuse, and sometimes flung the notebook away. The princess gave the wrong answer. "Well, aren't you a fool?" shouted the prince, shoving the notebook away. He got up at once, paced about, touched the princess's hair with his hands, and sat down again. He moved closer and continued his explanations. "It won't do, princess, it won't do," he said when the princess, having taken and closed the notebook with the next day's lessons, was getting ready to leave. "Mathematics is a great thing, my lady, and I don't want you to be like our stupid women here. Much patience, much pleasure." He patted her on the cheek. "It will knock the foolishness out of your head." She was about to leave, but he gestured for her to stop and took a new, uncut book from the tall table. Here's some key to the mystery your Heloise sends you. Religious, but I don't interfere with anyone's beliefs. I've looked through it. Take it. Well, off with you. Off with you. He patted her on the shoulder and locked the door behind her. Princess Maria went back to her room with the sad, frightened expression which rarely left her and made her unattractive, sickly face still more unattractive, and sat down at her desk, covered with miniature portraits and heaped with books and notebooks. The princess was as disorderly as her father was orderly. She put down her geometry notebook and impatiently unsealed the letter. The letter was from the princess's closest childhood friend. This friend was the same Julie Kerrigan who had been at the Rostovs' name day party. Julie wrote, it's in French, I'll jump down to the English. "Dear and excellent friend, what a terrible and frightening thing is absence. Though I tell myself that half of my existence and of my happiness is in you, that despite the distance which separates us, our hearts are united by indissoluble bonds. My own heart revolts against destiny, and despite the pleasures and distractions that surround me, I am unable to overcome a certain hidden sadness which I feel at the bottom of my heart since our separation. Why are we not reunited? As this summer in your big study on the blue couch, the couch of confidences, why can I not, as 3 months ago, draw new moral strength from your look, so gentle, so calm, so penetrating, that look I loved so much and that I think I see before me as I write to you." Having read that far, Princess Maria sighed and glanced into the pier glass that stood to the right of her. The mirror reflected an unattractive, weak body and a thin face. Her eyes, always sad, now looked into the mirror with particular hopelessness. "She's flattering me," thought the princess, and she turned away and went on reading. Julie, however, was not flattering her friend. Indeed, the princess's eyes, large, deep, and luminous, sometimes it was as if rays of warm light came from them in sheaves, were so beautiful that very often, despite the unattractiveness of the whole face, those eyes were more attractive than beauty. But the princess had never seen the good expression of those eyes, the expression they had in moments when she was not thinking of herself. As with all people, the moment she looked into the mirror, her face assumed a strained, unnatural, bad expression. She went on reading. French. So down to the English. "All Moscow talks only of war. One of my brothers is already abroad. The other is with the guards who are starting on the march to the frontier. Our dear emperor has left Petersburg and they claim is intending to expose his own precious existence to the hazards of war. God grant the Corsican monster who is destroying the peace of Europe be overthrown by the angel whom the Almighty in his mercy has given us for a sovereign. Not to mention my brothers, this war has deprived me of a relation that is one of the dearest to my heart. I'm speaking of young Nikolai Rostov, who with his enthusiasm could not bear inaction and has left the university to go and enlist in the army. Well, dear Marie, I'll admit to you that despite his extreme youth, his leaving for the army has been a great sadness for me. The young man of whom I spoke to you this summer has so much nobility, so much true youthfulness, which one encounters so rarely in the age we live in among our old men of 20. Above all, he has so much candor and heart. He is so pure and poetical that my relations with him, ephemeral as they were, have been one of the sweetest joys of my poor heart, which has already suffered so much. One day I'll tell you about our farewells and all that got said in parting. It's all still too fresh. Dear friend, you are fortunate not to know these so poignant joys and sorrows. You are fortunate because the latter are usually the stronger. I know very well that Count Nikolai is too young ever to be able to be anything more than a friend to me, But this sweet friendship, these relations, so poetical and so pure, have been a need of my heart. But let us speak no more of that. The big news of the day, which all Moscow has taken up, is the death of old Count Vizukov and his inheritance. Imagine, the three princesses got very little, Prince Vasily got nothing, and it is Monsieur Pierre who has inherited everything, and who on top of that has been recognized as a legitimate son, consequently as Count Vizukov and possessor of the handsomest fortune in Russia. They claim that Prince Vasily played a very nasty role in this whole story, and that he has gone back quite sheepishly to Petersburg. I confess to you that I understand very little of all these matters of legacies and wills. What I do know is that the young man we knew simply under the name of Monsieur Pierre has become Count Vizukov and possessor of one of the largest fortunes in Russia. I have been much amused to observe the changes of tone and manners of mammas burdened with marriageable daughters, and of the young ladies themselves with regard to this individual who, parenthetically, has always seemed a poor sort to me. Since people have amused themselves for the past years by making matches for me that I mostly knew nothing about, the matrimonial chronicle of Moscow is now making me Countess Vizukov. But you can feel very well that I do not care at all to become that. Speaking of marriage, do you know that the Aunt in General, Anna Mikhailovna, under the seal of greatest secrecy, has confided to me a plan to get you married? It is no more nor less than the son of Prince Vasily, Anatoly, whom they would like to set up by marrying him to a rich and distinguished person, and the choice of the parents has fallen on you. I do not know how you would look at it, but I thought it my duty to warn you of it. He's said to be very handsome and a very bad boy, and that is all I have been able to learn about him. But enough of this chattering. I finished my second sheet, and Mamma has sent for me to go to dinner at the Apraxins. Read the mystical book I am sending you, and that is causing a furor here. Though there are things in this book that are hard to grasp with weak human understanding, it is an admirable book, the reading of which calms and elevates the soul. Farewell, my respects to your father, and my compliments to Mademoiselle Bory. I embrace you as I love you, Julie. P.S. Give me news of your brother and his charming little wife. The princess pondered, smiled pensively, at which her face, lit up by her luminous eyes, was completely transformed, and suddenly getting up, went with her heavy step to the desk. She took out some paper, and her hand quickly began moving across it. This is what she wrote in reply. We'll jump down to the English. Dear and excellent friend, your letter of the 13th gave me great joy. So you still love me, my poetical Julie. Absence, of which you say such bad things, has thus not had its usual influence on you. You complain about absence. What would I have to say if I dared to complain, deprived of all those who are dear to me? Ah, if we do not have religion to console us, life would be quite sad. Why do you suppose me to have a stern look when you speak to me of your affection for the young man? In that connection, I am strict only with myself. I understand these feelings in others, and if I cannot approve of them, never having felt them, I do not condemn them. It only seems to me that Christian love, the love of one's neighbor, the love for one's enemies, is more meritorious, sweeter, and more beautiful than are the feelings that the beautiful eyes of a young man can inspire in a poetical and loving girl like you. The news of the death of Count Vizukov reached us before your letter. My father was much affected by it. He says that he was the next to last representative of the grand century, and that now it is his turn, and that he will do his best to put his turn off for as long as possible. God keeps us from that terrible misfortune. I cannot share my opinion of Pierre, whom I knew as a child. He always seemed to me to have an excellent heart, and that is the quality I esteem the most in people. As for his inheritance, and the role Prince Vasily played in it, it is a sad thing for them both. Ah, dear friend, the words of our divine Savior, that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. That word is terribly true. I pity Prince Vasily, and I feel even sorrier for Pierre, so young and burdened with such wealth. What temptations he will have to endure. If I were asked what I would like most in the world, it would be to be poorer than the poorest beggar. 1,000 thanks, dear friend, for the work you have sent me. and which is causing such a furor there. However, since you tell me that amidst several good things there are others that weak human understanding cannot grasp, it would seem to me rather useless to occupy myself with unintelligible reading matter, which by the very fact cannot be of any fruit. I have never been able to understand the passion certain persons have for muddling their wits by fastening upon mystical books, which only awaken doubts in their mind, excite their imagination, and give them an exaggerated character totally contrary to Christian simplicity. Let us read the apostles in the gospel. Let us not seek to penetrate what they contain of the mysterious. For how should we dare aspire, miserable sinners that we are, to initiate ourselves into the terrible and sacred secrets of providence, so long as we wear this fleshy husk, which raises an impenetrable veil between us and the eternal? Let us limit ourselves, then, to studying the sublime principles that our divine Savior has left for us for our conduct here below. Let us seek to conform ourselves to them and to follow them. Let us persuade ourselves that the less flight we give to our weak human spirit, the more pleasing it is to God, who rejects all science that does not come from him, that the less we seek to delve into what he has been pleased to conceal from our nature, conceal from our knowledge, the sooner he will grant us the discovery of it through his divine Spirit. My father did not speak to me of the suitor. He only told me that he had received a letter and was awaiting a visit from Prince Vasily. As for the marriage plan regarding me, I shall tell you, dear and excellent friend, that for me marriage is a divine institution to which one must conform oneself. However painful it may be for me, if the Almighty ever imposes upon me the duties of a wife and mother, I shall try to fulfill them as faithfully as I can, without troubling myself with the examination of my feelings regarding him whom he will give me for a husband. I have received a letter from my brother who announces his arrival at Bald Hills with his wife. This will be a short-lived joy, since he is leaving us to take part in this wretched war in which we are being dragged, God knows how or why. Not just with you there in the center of affairs and of the world is there only talk of war, but here in the midst of these rural labors and this calm of nature which city dwellers usually picture to themselves in the country, the noise of war makes itself heard and felt painfully. My father speaks of nothing but marches and countermarches and things of which I have no understanding. The day before yesterday, while going for my usual stroll along the village street, I was witness to a heart-rending scene. It was a convoy of recruits enlisted from our estate and being sent off to the army. You should have seen the state that the mothers, the wives, and the children of these departing men were in, and heard the sobs on both sides. You would think that humanity has forgotten the laws of its divine Savior, who preached love and the forgiveness of transgressions, that it may find its greatest merit in the art of mutual killing. Farewell, dear and good friend. May our divine Savior and his most holy mother keep you in their holy and powerful care. Marie.
Actions speak louder than words.
Ah, you're sending a letter, Princess. I've already sent mine. I wrote to my poor mother. The smiling Mademoiselle Bourienne spoke in a quick and pleasant, juicy little voice, swallowing her R's and bringing with her into the concentrated, sad, and dreary atmosphere of Princess Maria a completely different and frivolously gay and self-contented world. Let's see. Princess, I must warn you, she added, lowering her voice. The prince has had an altercation, she said, deliberately swallowing her R's and listening to herself with pleasure. An altercation with Mikhail Ivanov. He's in a very bad humor, very morose. Be warned, you know. Ah, my dear friend, answered Prince Maria. I begged you never to warn me of the humor my father happens to be in. I do not allow myself to judge him, and I would prefer that others do not do so. The princess glanced at her watch, and noticing that she was already 5 minutes late for playing the clavichord, went with a frightened face to the sitting room. According to the established order of the day, between noon and 2 o'clock, the prince rested, and the princess played the clavichord. Section 23. The gray-haired valet sat dozing and listening to the prince snoring in the immense study. From the far side of the house, from beyond a closed door, came the sounds of a Dussek sonata, the difficult passages repeated 20 times. Just then, a carriage and a britska drove up to the porch, and from the carriage stepped Prince Andrei, who helped his little wife out and allowed her to go ahead. Gray-haired Tikhon, in a wig, stuck himself out the door of the waiting room, said in a whisper that the prince was sleeping, and hastily closed the door. Tikhon knew that neither the son's arrival nor any sort of extraordinary event was to interrupt the order of the day. Prince Andrei evidently knew it as well as Tikhon. He looked at his watch as if to check whether his father's habits had changed during the time he had not seen him, and verifying that they had not, turned to his wife. "He'll get up in 20 minutes. Let's go to Princess Maria," he said. The little princess had filled out during this time, but her eyes and her short lip, with its little mustache and smile, rose as gaily and sweetly as ever when she began to speak. "Mais c'est un palais," she said to her husband, looking around with the expression of someone paying compliments to the host at a ball. "Allons vite, vite." Looking around them, she smiled at Tikhon and at her husband and at the servant who had accompanied them. "C'est Marie qui s'exerce. Allons doucement. Il fait le surprendre." Prince Andrei walked behind her with a polite and sad expression. "You've aged, Tikhon," he said to the old man, who kissed his hand as he passed. Before the room from which the sounds of the clavichord came, a pretty blonde French woman popped out of the side door. Mademoiselle Bourienne seemed wildly ecstatic. "Ah, quel bonheur pour la princesse," she said. "Enfin, il fait que je la prévienne. Non, de grâce. Vous êtes Mademoiselle Bourienne. Je vous connais déjà par l'amitié que vous porte la belle soeur," said the princess, kissing her. "Elle ne nous attend pas." They went up to the door of the sitting room, and through which came the sounds of the same passage repeated again and again. Prince Andrei stopped and winced as if expecting something unpleasant. The princess went in. The passage broke off in the middle. A cry was heard, then the heavy footsteps of Princess Maria and the sounds of kissing. When Prince Andrei went in, the two princesses, who had seen each other only once for a short time at Prince Andrei's wedding, were standing with their arms around each other, their lips pressed hard to whatever place they had happened upon in the first moment. Mademoiselle Bourienne was standing beside them, her hands pressed to her heart, smiling piously, apparently as ready to weep as to laugh. Prince Andrei shrugged his shoulders and winced, as music lovers wince when they hear a false note. The two women let go of each other, then again, as if fearing it would be too late, kissed each other by the hands, again kissing, tore their hands away, and then again began kissing each other on the face, and quite unexpectedly for Prince Andrei, they both wept and began to kiss again. Mademoiselle Bourienne also wept. Prince Andrei obviously felt awkward, but for the two women it seemed natural to weep. It seemed it had never occurred to them that their meeting could be otherwise. "Ah, chérie, ah, Marie," the two women suddenly began to speak and then laughed. "Je rêve cette nuit. Vous ne nous attendez donc pas. Ah, Marie, vous avez marqué, et vous avez reprise." "And I recognized the princess at once," Mademoiselle Bourienne put in. "And I had no idea. Ah, Andrei, I didn't see you," exclaimed Princess Maria. Prince Andrei and his sister kissed each other's hands, and he told her that she was the same crybaby she had always been. Princess Maria turned to her big brother. Through her tears, the loving, warm, and meek gaze of her big, luminous eyes, very beautiful at the moment, rested on Prince Andrei's face. The little princess talked nonstop. Her short upper lip with its little mustache would momentarily flit down, touching where it had to the rosy lower lip, and opened up again in a smile of gleaming teeth and eyes. She told about an incident that happened to her at Spasko Hill, which was dangerous for her in her condition, and just after that said she had left all her dresses in Petersburg and would go about here in God knows what, and that Andrei was quite changed, and that Kitty Ordyantsev had married an old man, and that there was a suitor for Princess Maria, pour tout de bon, but we'll talk about that later. Princess Maria went on silently looking at her brother, and there was love and sadness in her beautiful eyes. It was clear that she had established her own train of thought, independent of her sister-in-law's talk. In the middle of her story about the last feats in Petersburg, she addressed her brother. And you're decidedly going to the war, Andre? She said, sighing. Lise also sighed. Tomorrow, even, her brother answered. He's abandoning me here, and God knows why, when he could have had a promotion. Princess Maria did not finish listening, and continuing with the thread of her thoughts, turned to her sister-in-law, her gentle eyes indicating her stomach. Is it certain? She asked. The princess's face changed. She sighed. Yes, certain, she said. Ah, it's very frightening. Lisa's little lip lowered. She brought her face close to her sister-in-law's face and again wept unexpectedly. She needs rest, said Prince Andre, wincing. Isn't it so, Lisa? Take her to your rooms and I'll go to father. How is he? The same? The same, yes, the same. I don't know whether in your eyes, the princess replied joyfully. The same hours and the same strolls in the avenues, the lathe? Asked Princess Andre with a barely perceptible smile, which showed that, despite all his love and respect for his father, he was aware of his weaknesses. The same hours and the same lathe, also mathematics and my geometry lessons. Princess Maria replied joyfully, as though her lessons in geometry were one of the most joyful expressions of her life. When they had waited out the 20 minutes until it was time for the old prince to get up, Tikhon came to summon the young prince to his father. In honor of his son's arrival, the old man had made an exception in his way of life. He gave orders to allow him into his part of the house while he was still dressing for dinner. The prince held to the fashion of wearing a kaftan and powdering his hair. At the moment when Prince Andre, not with that peevish expression and manner he assumed in drawing rooms, but with the same animated face he had when he talked with Pierre, came to his father's, the old man was sitting in his dressing room, on a wide Morocco-upholstered armchair, in a powdering mantle, entrusting his head to Tikhon's hands. Ah, the warrior! So you want to defeat Bonaparte, said the old man, shaking his powdered head as much as the braided queue, which was in Tikhon's hand, would let him. At least give him a good drubbing, or pretty soon he'll be writing us down too, as his subjects. Greetings, he said, and he offered his cheek. The old man was in high spirits following his before-dinner nap. He used to say that an after-dinner nap was silver, but a before-dinner nap was gold. He joyfully cast sidelong glances at his son from under his thick, beetling brows. Prince Andre went up and kissed his father on the place indicated to him. He did not respond to his father's favorite subject, poking fun at the present-day military, especially at Bonaparte. Yes, I've come to see you, Papa, and with a pregnant wife, said Prince Andre, his animated and respectful eyes following the movement of every feature in his father's face. How is your health? Only fools and profligates can be unwell, my boy. And you know me, I'm busy from morning till evening. I'm temperate, so I'm well. Thank God, his son said, smiling. God has nothing to do with it. Well, tell me, he went on, getting back on his hobby horse. How have the Germans taught you to fight Bonaparte by this new science of yours known as strategy? Prince Andre smiled. Let me collect my wits, Papa, he said, with a smile that showed that his father's weaknesses did not prevent him from loving and respecting him. I haven't even settled in. Nonsense, nonsense, cried the old man, shaking his queue to see whether it was tightly braided, and seized his son's arm. The house is ready for your wife. Princess Maria will take her around and show her and babble 3 cartloads. That's their womanish business. I'm glad of her. Sit down, tell me. Mikhelson's army, I understand, and Tolstoy's. Simultaneous landing. What's the Southern Army going to do? Prussia, neutrality. That I know. What about Austria? He was getting up from his chair and pacing the room, with Tikhon running after him and handing him pieces of clothing. What about Sweden? How will they cross Pomerania? Seeing his father's insistent demand, Prince Andre, reluctantly at first, but then with more and more animation, and inadvertently switching from Russian to French, out of habit, in the middle of his discourse, began to explain the plans of operation for the proposed campaign. He told how a 90,000-man army was to threaten Prussia so as to draw her out of neutrality and involve her in the war, how part of that army was to unite with the Swedish army in Stralsund, how 220,000 Austrians united with 100,000 Russians were to go into action in Italy and on the Rhine, and how 50,000 Russians and 50,000 English would land at Naples, and how in a 500,000-strong army would attack the French from different sides. The old prince showed not the slightest interest during the telling, as though he was not listening, and continuing to dress as he paced, interrupted him 3 times unexpectedly. Once he stopped him and shouted, "The white one! The white one!" This meant that Tikhon had not handed him the waistcoat he wanted. Another time he asked, "And how soon will she give birth?" And shaking his head reproachfully, said, "Not good. Go on, go on." The third time, as Prince Andrei was finishing his description, the old man sang in an old man's off-key voice, "Malbrug sen vatienge, deset conviendra." Marlborough is going to war. God knows when he'll come back. His son merely smiled. "I'm not saying that this is a plan I approve of," the son said. "I've only told you what's in it. Napoleon has already put together a plan no worse than this one." "Well, you haven't told me anything new," the old man muttered pensively to himself in a quick patter. "Tu sais quand me vendra." Go to the dining room. And that is the end for today.
No damage to report.
Whew, it's rather a lot. Sorry, it's a bit longer than I kind of anticipated. And what with all the having to jump down for the French in the middle. So it seems that Pierre got the inheritance after all, and Prince Vasily has been called out about it. And Anna Mikhailovna is still scheming away somehow to get her hands in it. And so now we're in the country with Prince Andrei's family. So it'll be interesting to see what goes next. And Julie Kerrigan, who she was the one who was sitting with the Rostov boy at the party, and he's the one who, him and his cousin Sonia are quite close, and Sonia was jealous of Julie, so very interesting to see everyone's different points of view on this. But I'm a little worried about Pierre having all that money, because he's kind of not been good with money so far. He's kind of a partier, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there, but interesting to see how everyone's little intrigues and romances work out. So, sorry again for the disruption in service earlier. Don't know what that was about. Thanks for sticking around for this longer meeting today. I promise tomorrow won't be as long, and hopefully we won't have any more technical troubles. But again, thank you guys for tuning in for Quarantine Story Hour with me and Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. See you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye. Good afternoon. Happy Friday, everybody. GIF. We're back again with some more Quarantine Story Hour, this time continuing as we have been with War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This translation I'm reading from is a newer translation by Richard Pavir and Larissa Volonkonsky. If you haven't tuned in before, thanks for joining. If you have, thanks for coming back. To pick up any of the things you've missed, there's a War and Peace playlist on my channel with all the readings so far. It's getting a little complicated to sum up everything up, but there's a lot of intrigues, a lot of different people involved. Pierre, who is a bastard son of a count, who seems like he may have gotten his inheritance. And there's Prince Andrei and his pregnant wife and his sister, and a whole host of other people involved now in all the intrigues happening between Petersburg and Moscow and Prince Andrei's father's house, Bald Hills, which is in the country. Today's reading will be a little bit shorter. Sorry, yesterday's was really long. Got a little carried away, didn't realize how long it was. Today's is going to be shorter. I have a lot of other things I actually have to jump around and do today. So, and you'll also see we're coming to a milestone. So let's just go ahead and jump in. I'll put the link for the playlist at the end of this video. There's a lot of different languages involved here. So there's Russian names, there's some French. Some of the French I will read if it's like a few words or sentences, but for longer sections there's translations in English, so I'll just cue you that I'm jumping down to those English. And so if you're ever curious about wanting, maybe you speak French, or because sometimes there's nuances that are lost in translation, you're welcome to pick up a copy and look for the original French, or pick up a copy and translate some of the French to English, or vice versa. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. We are on Volume 1, Part 1, Section 24 today, and we'll do 24 and 25. At the appointed hour, powdered and clean-shaven, the prince came out to the dining room, where he was awaited by his daughter-in-law, Princess Maria, Mademoiselle Bourrienne, and the prince's architect, who by the prince's strange caprice was admitted to the table, though by his insignificant position the man could in no way count on such an honor. The prince, who in his life kept firmly to social distinctions and rarely admitted even important provincial officers to the table, suddenly decided to demonstrate by means of the architect Mikhail Ivanovich, who used to blow his nose in the corner on a checkered handkerchief, that all men are equal, and more than once impressed it upon his daughter that Mikhail Ivanovich was no worse than you or I. At table, the prince most often addressed himself to the wordless Mikhail Ivanovich. In the dining room, immensely high like all the rooms in the house, the prince's entrance was awaited by the domestics and servants standing behind each chair. The butler, a napkin over his arm, examined the place settings, winking to the latchkeys and constantly shifting his anxious gaze from the wall clock to the door from which the prince was to appear. Prince Andrei was looking at a huge gilded frame, new to him, with a picture of the family tree of the Princes Bolkonsky, which hung across the room from an equally large frame, with a poorly painted portrait, obviously from the hand of a household artist, of a sovereign prince in a crown, who was supposed to be a descendant of Rurik and the first ancestor of the Bolkonsky family. Prince Andrei looked at this genealogical tree, shaking his head and chuckling with an air of someone looking at a portrait that is a ridiculously good likeness. "That's him all over," he said to Princess Maria, who came up to him. Princess Maria looked at her brother in surprise. She did not understand what made him smile. Everything her father did evoked an awe in her which was not subject to discussion. "Every man has his Achilles heel," Prince Andrei went on, "with his enormous intelligence, donneur d'un ridicule." Princess Maria could not understand her brother's bold opinions and was getting ready to object to him when the awaited footsteps were heard from the study. The prince came in quickly, gaily, as he always did, as if deliberately contrasting his hasty movements to the strict order of the house. At the same moment, the big clock struck 2, and another in the drawing room responded in a high voice. The prince stopped. From under his thick, beetling brows, his lively, bright, stern eyes looked around at everyone and rested on the young princess. The young princess experienced at that moment the feeling courtiers experienced at the appearance of a tsar, that feeling of fear and respect which this old man evoked in all those around him. He stroked the princess's head, and then, with an awkward gesture, patted her on the back of the neck. "Delighted, delighted," he said, and looked at her intently in the eye once again, quickly stepped away and sat down in his place. Sit down, Mikhail Ivanovich, sit down." He pointed his daughter-in-law to the place next to him. A servant pulled out the chair for her. "Ho, ho," said the old man, looking at her rounded waist. "Rushing things, that's not good." He laughed dryly, coldly, unpleasantly, as he always laughed, only with his mouth, not with his eyes. "You must walk as much as possible, he said. The little princess either did not hear or did not want to hear his words. She was silent and seemed embarrassed. The prince asked about her father, and the princess began to speak and smiled. He asked her about mutual acquaintances. The princess became still more animated and started talking away, giving the prince greetings and town gossip. La comtesse Apoxine le pauvre a perdu son mari et elle est plus les rames de l'œil, she said, becoming more and more animated. As her animation increased, the prince looked at her more and more sternly, and suddenly, as if he had studied her enough, arrived at a clear idea of her, and turned away and addressed Mikhail Ivanovich. "Well now, Mikhail Ivanovich, things are going badly for our friend Bonaparte. Prince Andrei," he always referred to his son in the third person like this, "has just been telling me what forces are being prepared against him, but you and I are always considered him an empty man." Mikhail Ivanovich, who had no idea when this you and I had spoken such words about Bonaparte, but who understood that he was needed in order to launch into their favorite subject, looked at the young prince in surprise, not knowing what would come of it. "We have a great statistician here." the prince said to his son, pointing to the architect. And the conversation again turned to war, to Bonaparte and today's generals and statesmen. The old prince seemed to be convinced not only that all present-day men of action were mere boys who did not even understand the ABCs of military and state affairs, and that Bonaparte was a worthless little Frenchman who was successful only because there were no Potemkins and Suvorovs to oppose him, but he was also convinced that there were no political difficulties in Europe, nor was there a war, but only some sort of marionette comedy that today's people played at, pretending they meant business. Prince Andrei cheerfully endured his father's mockery of the new people, and provoked his father to talk and listen to him with obvious delight. All that there was before seems good, he said, but wasn't it that same Suvorovs who fell into the trap set for him by Moreau and was unable to get out of it? Who told you that? Who told you? Cried the prince. Suvorov! And he flung away his plate, which was deftly caught by Tikhon. Suvorov! Think a little, Prince Andrei. 2 men, Friedrich and Suvorov. Moreau could have been captured if Suvorov had had a free hand, but he had the Hofkriegswurst Schnapsrath on his hands. Even the devil wouldn't be half glad of that. But go, you'll learn about those Hofkriegswurst Schnapsraths. Suvorov couldn't get on with them. How is Mikhail Kutuzov going to do it? No, my friend, he went on, you and your generals won't get around Bonaparte. You need to get a hold of a Frenchman so that their own don't know their own, and their own beat their own. They sent the General Pachen to New York, to America, to fetch the madman Moreau, he said, alluding to the invitation made to Moreau that year to enter the Russian service. Wonders! What were the Potemkins, the Suvorovs, the Orlovs? Germans? No, brothers. Either you're all lost your wits there, or mine have burnt out. God help you, but we'll see. Take Bonaparte for a great general. I'm by no means saying that all plans are good, said Prince Andrei. Only I can't understand how you can make such a judgment about Bonaparte. Laugh all you like, but Bonaparte is still a great general. Mikhail Ivanovich, the old prince cried to the architect, who, being busy with the roast, had hoped to be forgotten. Didn't I tell you Bonaparte was a great tactician? Well, he says so too. Sure thing, Your Excellency, replied the architect. The prince laughed again, his cold laugh. Bonaparte was born lucky. He has excellent soldiers, and the Germans were the first he attacked. You'd have to be a do-nothing not to beat the Germans. Ever since the world began, everyone's beaten the Germans, and they've beaten nobody, except each other. It was on them he earned his glory. And the prince began to analyze all the mistakes which, to his way of thinking, Bonaparte had made in all his wars and even in state affairs. His son did not object, but it was clear that, whatever the arguments presented to him, he was as little able to change his opinion as the old prince was. Prince Andrei listened, holding back his objections, and involuntarily amazed at how this old man, who had sat alone in the country uninterruptedly for so many years, could know and discuss in such detail and with such subtlety all the military and political circumstances of Europe in recent years. You think I'm an old man and don't understand the real state of affairs, he concluded. But I have it all up here. I don't sleep nights. So where has this great general of yours shown himself? That would be a long story, said his son. Off with you to your Bonaparte, then. Mademoiselle Bourienne, voilà encore une admirature de votre goujat d'empereur, he shouted in excellent French. Vous savez que je ne suis pas bonapartiste, mon prince. Dieu sait quand reviendra, the prince sang off-key, laughed still more off-key, and left the table. All through the argument and the rest of dinner, the little princess was silent and kept glancing fearfully now at Princess Maria, now at her father-in-law. When they left the table, she took her sister-in-law by the arm and led her to another room. Comme c'est un homme d'espérer votre pierre, she said. C'est à cause de cela peut-être qu'il me fait peur. Ah, he's so kind, said the princess.
Can I direct you somewhere, Lieutenant?
Section 25. Prince Andrei was leaving the next evening. The old prince, not abandoning his order, went to his rooms after dinner. The little princess was with her sister-in-law. Prince Andrei, dressed in a traveling frock coat without epaulettes, was packing with his valet in the rooms assigned to him. He personally saw to the carriage and the loading of the trunks and ordered the horses harnessed up.
Just wish there
All
was
that remained in the room were the objects Prince Andrei always carried with him: a strong box, a big silver cellaret, two Turkish pistols, and a saber, a present from his father, brought back from a Chokov. All these traveling accessories Prince Andrei kept in great order. Everything was new, clean, in broad cloth covers, carefully tied with tapes. At the moment of departure and a change of life, people capable of reflecting on their actions usually get into a serious state of mind. At these moments, they usually take stock of the past and make plans for the future. Prince Andrei's face was very thoughtful and tender. His hands behind his back, he paced rapidly up and down the room, looking straight ahead and thoughtfully shaking his head.
Are you doing a number on me?
Was he afraid of going to war? Was he sad to be leaving his wife? Perhaps both, but evidently not wishing to be seen in such a state. When he heard footsteps in the hallway, he quickly unclasped his hands, stopped by the table, pretending to tie the tapes on the strong box cover, and assumed his usual calm and impenetrable expression. They were the heavy footsteps of Princess Marya. "They told me you gave orders to harness up," she said breathlessly. She had obviously come running. "And I wanted so much to talk more with you, alone. God knows how long we're parting again. You're not angry that I've come. You've changed very much, Andrushka," she added, as if to explain her question. She smiled as she pronounced the name, Andrushka. It must have been strange to her to think that this stern, handsome man was the same Andrushka, a thin, frolicsome boy, her childhood companion. "And where is Lise?" he asked, only smiling in answer to her question. She was so tired that she fell asleep in my room on the sofa. "Ah, André, quel trousseau de femme vous avez," she said, sitting down on the sofa opposite her brother. "She is a perfect child, such a dear married child. I've come to love her so." Prince Andrei was silent, but the princess noticed the ironic and scornful expression that appeared on his face. "But one must be indulgent towards little weaknesses. Who doesn't have them, Andrei? Don't forget that she grew up and was formed in society, and then her position now isn't very rosy. One must enter into each person's position. Tu comprends, c'est tout pardonner. Just think how it is for the poor dear in her condition, after the life she's used to part from her husband and remain alone in the country. It's very hard." Prince Andrei smiled, looking at his sister, as we smile listening to people whom we think we can see through. "You live in the country and you don't find this life so terrible," he said. "I'm another matter. Why talk of me? I do not and cannot wish for any other life, because I don't know any other life. But think, Andrei, for a young and worldly woman in the best years of her life to be buried in the country alone because Papa's always busy and you know me, how poor I am and resources, for a woman accustomed to the best society. Mademoiselle Bourrienne alone." "I dislike her very much, your Bourrienne," said Prince Andrei. "Oh no, she's very dear and kind, and above all, a pitiful girl. She has nobody. To tell the truth, she's not only unnecessary to me, she's even an inconvenience. You know, I've always been a wild creature, and now more than ever. I like being alone. Mon Pierre likes her very much. She and Mikhail Ivanovich are the two persons with whom he's always gentle and kind, because he's their benefactor. As Stern says, we love people not so much for the good they've done us, as for the good we've done them. Mon Pierre took her as an orphan, sur le pave, and she's very kind. And Mon Père likes her way of reading. She reads aloud to him in the evenings. She reads beautifully." "Well, but in truth, Marie, I wonder if Father's character isn't sometimes hard on you," Prince Andrei asked suddenly. Prince Marya was first surprised, then frightened by the question. "On me? Hard on me," she said. "He's always been tough, but now I think he's becoming difficult," said Prince Andrei, probably speaking so lightly of their father on purpose to puzzle or test his sister. "You're very good in every way, Andrei, but you have a sort of mental pride," the princess said, following her own train of thought, more than the course of the conversation, "and that is a great sin. Is it possible to judge one's father? And even if it were possible, what other feelings than veneration can a man like Mon Père evoke? I'm so content and happy with him. I only wish everyone could be as happy as I am." Her brother shook his head mistrustfully. "That's one thing that's hard for me. To tell you the truth, André, is father's way of thinking in the religious respect. I don't understand how a man with such an enormous intellect cannot see what is clear as day and can be so deluded. That constitutes my one unhappiness. But here too, I've seen a shade of improvement recently. His mockery recently hasn't been so biting, and there's a monk whom he received and with whom he spoke for a long time. Well, my friend, I'm afraid you and this monk are wasting your power, Prince André said mockingly but affectionately. Ah, mon ami, I only pray to God and hope he will hear me. André, she said timidly after a moment's silence, I have a big request to make of you. What is it, my friend? No, promise me you won't refuse. It won't be any trouble for you, and there won't be anything in it that's unworthy of you. Only you'll comfort me. Promise, Andrushka, she said, putting her hand into her reticule and taking hold of something in it, but not showing it yet, as if what she was holding constituted the object of her request, and before she got his promise to fulfill her request, she could not take this something out of her reticule. She looked at her brother with a timid, pleading gaze. Even if it was a great deal of trouble for me, Prince André said, as if guessing what it was about. You can think what you like. I know you're the same as mon Pierre. Think what you like, but do it for me. Do it, please. Father's father, our grandfather, wore it through all the wars. She still would not take out what she was holding out of her reticule. So promise me? Of course, what is it? André, I'm going to bless you with an icon, and you promise me never to take it off. Do you promise? Of course, if it doesn't weigh 100 pounds and pull my neck down. To give you pleasure, said Prince André. But that same second, noticing the distressed look that came to his sister's face at this joke, he instantly repented. I'm very glad, truly very glad, my friend, he added. Against your will he will save you and have mercy on you and turn you to him, because in him alone there is trust and peace, she said in a voice trembling from emotion, with a solemn gesture, holding up in both her hands before her brother an old oval icon of the Savior with a blackened face in a silver setting on a finely wrought silver chain. She crossed herself, kissed the icon, and gave it to André. Please, André, for me. From her big eyes shone rays of a kindly and timid light. These eyes lit up her whole, thin, sickly face and made it beautiful. Prince André wanted to take the icon, but she stopped him. André understood, made a sign of a cross, and kissed the icon. His face was at the same time tender, he was touched, and mocking. Merci, mon ami. She kissed him on the forehead and sat down again on the sofa. They were silent. So I was saying to you, André, be kind and magnanimous, as you've always been. Don't judge Lise too severely, she began. She's so dear, so kind, and her position is very hard now. I don't believe I've said anything to you, Masha, about reproaching my wife for anything or being displeased with her. Why are you saying all this to me? Prince Maria broke into red blotches and said nothing, as if she felt guilty. I haven't said anything to you, but it has already been said to you, and that makes me sad. The red blotches stood out still more on Princess Maria's forehead, neck, and cheeks. She wanted to say something, but could not bring it out. Her brother had guessed right. The little princess had wept after dinner, had said she had a foreboding of a bad delivery, was afraid of it, and had complained about her life, her father-in-law, and her husband. After her tears, she had fallen asleep. Prince André felt sorry for his sister. Know one thing, Masha, I cannot, have not, and never will reproach my wife for anything. Nor can I reproach myself for anything in relation to her. And that will always be so, whatever circumstances I find myself in. But if you want to know the truth, if you want to know whether I'm happy, no. Is she happy? No. Why is that? I don't know. As he was saying this, he got up and went over to his sister, and bending down, kissed her on the forehead. His fine eyes shone with an intelligent and kindly, unhabitual light, but he was looking not at his sister, but into the darkness of the open doorway over her head. Let's go to her. I must say goodbye. Or you go alone, wake her up, and I'll come presently, Petrushka. Petrushka, he called to his valet, come here, take these things out. This goes under the seat, this to the right-hand side. Princess Maria got up and went to the door. She paused.
Hi,
André,
I'm Nicole Hockley
si
from
vous
Sadie
avez la
Promise.
foi,
I know this is hard to hear, but
serez
it's
André's
important.
adieu.
The
Pour
shooter
quel
murdered
but
my son,
donnez
Harry.
l'amour que vous ne sentez pas et votre prière aurait été exaucée. Yes, there's always that, said Prince André. Go, Masha, I'll come presently. On the way to his sister's room, in the gallery that connected one house to the other, Prince André met the sweetly smiling Mademoiselle Bourrienne, who 3 times that day had already run into him with her rapturous and naive smile in secluded passages. Ah, je vous joyeuse chez vous, she said, blushing and lowering her eyes for some reason. Prince Andrei looked at her sternly. A spiteful look suddenly came to Prince Andrei's face. He said nothing to her, but avoiding her eyes, looked at her forehead and hair with such scorn that the French woman blushed and left without saying anything. When he approached his sister's room, the princess was already awake, and her merry little voice could be heard through the open door, hurriedly sending out one word after another. She was talking as if, after a long absence, she wanted to make up for lost time. Non, mais figurez-vous la vieille comtesse Zuboff avec des fausses boucles et les bouches pleines de fausses dents comme elle laissait le pavé. Défaire le anis. Ha ha ha, Marie. 5 times already with other people, Prince Andrei had heard exactly the same phrases about the Comtesse Zubov and the same laughter from his wife. He quietly went into the room. The princess, round, rosy, with her work in her hands, was sitting in an armchair and talking non-stop, telling over her Petersburg memories and even phrases. Prince Andrei went to her, stroked her head, and asked whether she had rested from the journey. She made a reply and went on with the small talk. The coach and six was standing at the porch. Outside it was a dark autumn night. The coachman could not see the shafts